Hey everyone, I'm going to give it a few minutes and then I'll get started. Pop into the chat and just say hello if you're here. Give it a few more. I'm going to give it a few more minutes. Just pop into the chat and say hello if you're here. And this is going to be Av 240 Character Animation 1 Graph Editor Deep Dive. Alright, well, I guess I'll go ahead and get started. We have one watching, so at any time, just pop into the chat and I have that open on a separate screen so I can see what you're saying and I can reply to any questions you might have. Alright, so we're going to go over Graph Editor Deep Dive, and we've looked over the Graph Editor a bit in week 1, but I want to go over a few tools to help you and make them very clear so when you're working in the Graph Editor it's just a little easier for you and you can kind of see what I'm looking at. So having this information within the slide form will be a great reminder for you to look back on as well. And let me get the different tab open. So the Maya help docs are also a great place to look if you can't quite remember some of the information we go over tonight, or if you're curious about learning more. The Maya help docs always have great information. They even have little visuals and stuff to help you out. So let me see. If you search for the thing that you're looking for up here in the search bar, so let's say Graph Editor, it'll give you some information, which I use some of it, some of the tips and stuff within some of your videos, your lectures. So they have great visuals in here, and they just kind of break down what some of the tools are if you can't remember and what those look like. So always rely on the Maya help docs if you're trying to remember some of the tools and things. All right, so it's going to be incredibly helpful for you in future animations, especially when they get a little more complicated, for you to be comfortable working in the graph editor. So getting used to that now would really benefit you. You can make tweaks and easily see how it's affecting your animation. Instead of messing up your animation within already set keys to see how you can make the animation work better, you can, if something feels snappy or off, you can quickly clean it up in the graph editor, clean those keys up. And then if it's not working, you can easily undo that. So I encourage you to try and use the graph editor, and the more that you work within the graph editor, the more comfortable it will become for you to use as a tool. All right, let's do a review of what we've learned about the graph editor before we dive into new information. And if you have, again, any questions along the way, or I've been a little mumbly so far, if something wasn't clear, just pop into the chat and I will reiterate or restate some of those things. All right, so the graph editor can be found under Windows, Animation Editors, and Graph Editor, and then that whole window will pop up. I usually have it on a second screen, and you can also open it up within your scene, and it'll be kind of attached to your window. Do a split screen, which I can show you in a bit when we get into my file that I've created for us tonight. We know that when we're looking at, or when we're editing the animation curves in the graph editor, we're looking at time versus value. And timing would be the speed of an action. Sorry about that. I was just checking something real quick because my video wasn't updating. Timing would be the speed of an action, and value would be where in space, XYZ, the action is happening. These are the quick keys for keying that Lewis went over. Translates would be Shift W, which you can see here would key that. Shift E would be rotates. And then Shift R would be the scale. That would be keyed, the scales in XYZ. As you get more into the graph editor, you'll see that the less keys that you add, the less keys you need to clean up. No problem, Stephanie. This will also be recorded, so if you missed anything, that'll be available too. I always send it out within messages. Thanks for joining. All right, I forgot where I'm at, but I will continue on. Yeah, so as soon as you get more into the graph editor, again, the less keys that you have, the less that you need to clean up. So if you really think about what you're trying to do within the animation or the action you're trying to accomplish, the hotkeys will help you. Now that being said, you're currently working on walk cycles. You'll need to key every pose I go over within your walk cycle playlist and within the run cycle lecture. Don't try to key less than the poses you need for your cycles. I'm giving you a full blueprint of what's needed, and you'll be graded on that. Even in the appealing walk, you'll still have contacts, passing poses, your ups and downs. They'll just look a little different because it'll be based on what your reference video is, or what walk you're trying to create. So when you start creating your own animations past these cycles, if you begin to work in the graph editor, you'll want to think about whether the keys you're adding serve a purpose. All right, so we learned about the graph editor tangents, and we kind of saw where you would use these and how they would help your animation. So we have the spline tangent, linear tangent, clamped tangent. Clamped is what we're using in the cycles, and I kind of use that one most of the time when I'm beginning and stuff, because clamped, if you have, let's say, your foot planted on the ground and it's staying there for a few frames, then that it won't go through the ground. It won't create kind of a spline. It'll stay, if the keys are the same, it'll stay linear. But then you also have the ability to have these splines happening too if the keys are a little more extreme, if that makes sense. I think we went over that within the graph editor tangents video if you need a review on some of those. And again, the Maya help docs is a great place to learn about these things as well. So we have stepped. Stepped is a great way if you're just getting started and you kind of are starting to do your own animations. If you work in stepped, you can definitely see what you're missing quickly and what you'll need to add, because it's not allowing Maya to interpolate what's in between the two keys that you set. Then we have flat tangent, plateau tangent, and auto tangent. So if you don't quite understand how to... We went over breaking some tangents within our graph editor lectures. Be careful with this. If you break tangents or make tangents scalable, which I would not recommend having any tangents scalable within your animation, and if you don't understand these, then what happens is it'll lead to a lot of issues when you set new keys. So if you have a very scalable, or if your tangents are scalable and you've kind of cleaned up the graph editor a little bit, if you set a new key, it'll have a lot of overshoots that are happening. So you might get really frustrated and not understand what's happening, and that might be why. So I would kind of recommend staying within the clamped tangent for your animations. That'll just be a little easier for you because it won't have all those overshoots happening. Alright, so now this is where the new information begins. And I kind of separated these on 2 slides, and we'll look at each of these within the Maya file I have. And I have these listed out so you can look back at this later if you can't if you can't quite remember what the hotkeys are for these tools. But again, Maya help docs will also have this information in there. So the first one we have is pan in the graph editor, and that's Alt middle mouse button drag. Then we have zoom in the graph editor, which is Alt right click drag. Zoom in on a curve, which is select and press F. And I'll show you this in just a minute. Let's get to the other slide just so you have these visible and you know what we're going to go over. So other tools that I'll show you today include resize the playback range, scrub animation, select a curve, you'll hold M and click your curve, and then move multiple keyframes in time without changing attribute values. Excuse me. So we go over this one a lot whenever we're working in our animation, but you would use, you would select the keyframes and shift middle mouse button drag left or right with those. Alright, let's go ahead and get into our Maya file. I just created this simple bouncing ball. And if you want to play with the bouncing ball rig, I did find it at Bloop Animation. You can download it for free. So whenever we're doing a playback, it's always good to see, I just clicked this little running guy at the bottom right here with the settings icon. It's always good to see what your frame rate is. 24 frames per second is what we're using. And then my playback speed is 24 frames per second by 1. If you play every frame, I know I go over this in another lesson, but I just want to reiterate it. It's so quick with the playback, and then when you play blast, it'll also be like that. So just make sure you're checking those settings. 24 frames per second by 1 is going to be what we need. Also, if you have the ability to see cached playback in your preferences, you can get to preferences by going Windows, Setting Preferences, Preferences as well. But I just clicked this little icon down here, the running guy icon down there. Make sure you have cached playback off, because if you turn it on, if you have keys set, this whole bar will turn blue, and it's going to store all that information for you. You're going to have a lot of issues, and your file could crash a lot, and we don't want that. While you're working on your assignments for this class and for Character Animation 2, make sure you have cached playback off for any scene that you're working on, and it'll save you some frustration there. Saving is important throughout your projects, because there's probably going to be a time where you're working on something and you thought you keyed it and you didn't, or you're going to have some crashes throughout with Maya. So make sure that you are enabling autosave if you ever have problems remembering to save your file constantly or within a decent time period. You can turn on autosave, and you can turn on an interval in minutes. For this, I'll say 10 minutes, because I'll start talking and then I'll forget to key and save. So let's do that. And finally, the last thing I will leave you with on settings preferences, I think this is the last thing you'll need. Well, I guess it's outside of setting preferences, but it's about settings. Always set your project. It's important to make sure your file is saving to the proper, folder structure, and that your textures and things are coming in. So you always, and if it's doing that incremental save, it needs to be set to your folder. So right now, because I just now setting my project, it's going to like my Maya projects and the documents. I don't want that. I want to go to my computer. I think it's Google File Stream. For this instance, I'll just save it to this file. That's fine, because I don't want to go through all the folder structures, because I'm working off Google Drive right now. But make sure you're saving to the correct folder for all of your scenes, because it'll just help you later. All right. Now, let's look at this bouncing ball. We have our squash. Let's get to the key, or the curves here. And then it stretches up quickly because it's bouncing up. It's still stretching into place, stretching, but it's about to settle. And then it settles at its highest point right here. Still got a little stretch there. Now it's coming back down, and gravity's taking over at this point, stretching. And we have our squash. So we have keys at some of our most important areas. So you can think of this one and this one. Like if you're thinking about our runs or our walk cycles, we have 2 contact poses. So we know that this is the the beginning pose, this is the end pose. What does it tell us about this cycling ball animation? It tells us that it is just a little over a second long because we're working at 24 frames per second and we have 25 frames set. Now, if we have that breakdown in the middle, it's our other key pose. Well, I guess it's our other key pose because it has to. Oh, sorry. I have something turned on in the background. But we know that this is the highest point of the animation. And then we have these other keys between these main poses, right? So this would be an in-between, and this would be an in-between. And they tell us the speed at which it's lifting and dropping, and it's also giving us some of our squash and stretch within there, showing gravity on this side as well. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of break those down because I was seeing some. It's important to understand what the key poses and breakdowns are and what an in-between is. All right, now let's go ahead and get into the graph editor, and you can turn that on through panels, save layouts, and perspective graph as well. And then that'll give you a split screen so you can see what's happening in your scene and the window's not covering up your perspective view. Turning something off real quick. There we go. All right, and I'm going to delete that because we don't need that. Those are some random keys that were set. All right, so I have my key. If you don't have your curves selected, then you won't see them in the graph editor. So let's see. We don't need this one selected, just these translate Ys here on those curves. Whoops, there we go. All right, so the first thing we want to do is pan in the graph editor. So we'll Alt, middle mouse button drag, and this is panning. This is helpful when you want to stay zoomed in on our keys, but you need to get to a different portion of the animation. So if it's a really long one and your time is, let's say, set only to here and we're only seeing, this amount, then we can move along in our graph editor. So let's say you're fixing your final key when you have on post infinity and you want to move to your first key. So if we zoom in really close to our last keys, and that's a hint, because you'll be turning on post infinity for every cycle that you create within this class. And there's a section in the rubric that grades on this. So again, for the cycles that you're making. And check the first and last keys within the assignment where it's somebody has already animated the full thing for you and you're just cleaning up the graph. That's another hint for you. All right, so say that we're zoomed in all the way on to our last keys. Go over, I'm going to Alt middle mouse button drag. I'm going to zoom out just a little and then do it. But then that allows you to check out the first frames but still stay zoomed in, because when you're cleaning up your first and last keys in the graph editor, when you have post infinity turned on, you have to make sure that the curves on both sides are kind of matching up in a nice smooth curve. And that'll be easier for you if you're zoomed in, just because the curves are a little hard to see. All right, next we have zoom, and that's Alt, right click, drag. That didn't work. Because I was hitting the wrong button. So right click, drag, Alt, right click, drag. There you go. That can be helpful if you have a lot of keys and a lot of time on your timeline and you just want to see what a small portion is doing within the curve. The next one is zoom in on the entire curve. So you'll select the curve. I just hit shift and then left clicked on my curve, and then I'm going to hit F. And then that zooms in on your entire curve for you. You can also select a few keys and hit F, and that'll allow you to zoom in quickly to where you need to be. Let me know if you have any questions as you're watching. I can see the chat open, so I can see if you have them. So I use that key, F key, to zoom in a lot, so then it's easier for you to see within the lecture videos. So you'll see me do that a lot. If I don't say what it is, that's F. That's what's getting me there closer and quicker. Now it kind of makes it look like a really straight line now that I've zoomed in that close and then came back out. If you want to just hit F, and it'll show you your actual curve again. I selected all those curves and clicked F. So for moving in your timeline, if you just want to see quickly what a small portion of your animation is doing and you want to play it and loop it, you can click this black tab here in the graph editor, left click it, and move it in. And then you can just, whoops, I hit spacebar on the graph editor so it became full screen. So hit play, and then it's just showing me that small loop. And as you see here, my timeline has changed as well. It's focusing on those keys that I asked it to focus on within the graph editor. So if I move this out on the right underneath the timeline, it'll move that black tab over too. So you can do it in a couple places. You can also change the number here. You can see that this blue box is changing as well. So there are a few different places if you want to quickly change that information or view something in a small portion of your animation. To scrub through the animation, you can just use this yellow bar, and you can, if you want to just see what a really small portion is doing and how it looks, because if it plays too fast, sometimes it's hard to catch if it's doing the right action. So you can use that, and then you can also do that down here on the timeline. Just left click and drag. To select a curve, you can hold M and click the curve. And you see that it's selecting that whole curve. So that could be helpful if you need to focus in on just one of those, or have that do something else. So if you look here, actually I'll show you that part in a minute. So next we have move multiple keyframes in time without changing the attribute values. So if you select Shift, middle mouse button, and drag those, you can do that. This is another hint for the assignment where the animation is already created for you and you're just checking out or trying to fix everything in the graph editor. None of the animation will be really fixed a key at a time. It'll be fixed by these curves, like selecting all of them and middle mouse button dragging. So when you're looking at your curves, check that out. The only time that you'll have an issue is first and last keyframes. Those will be a separate thing. So I can shift middle mouse button left and right is what I meant to do. That's for offsets, which you'll see in, I believe this week is offsets. We did some in the first week as well. Oh, it's important to have your values snapped, especially when you're moving your keyframes like that. Your main keyframe should always be on a whole number, and if you move it over without having that locked, sorry, which this is the one to snap your time on and off. If I move it, then the keyframes will kind of go on to a key that I can't reach on the timeline, and it makes things very difficult. You want to snap those to whole numbers because they're important keys that you're creating, and that tells us that they're important. These being on, decimal numbers kind of denotes that those are not important keys. So I'm going to undo that. You don't snap the actual value here, because you can have your values on decimal points, and actually it's going to help you if you can have decimal points. So the time is the only one that you want to snap. And that's just so your keys are always on a whole number. All right, so let's say that your values here, we'll look at this curve. I don't think all those keys are selected. Yeah, they are. Okay. Let's say that this animation is too extreme for us. So you can go into this value box here, and you can divide it equals 2, and then hit enter, and it'll make the animation less extreme. But if you do that, then you'll also have to look at what your keys are doing in your animation. So if we look at the ball at the top, it feels kind of like a heavier ball. So maybe there wouldn't be as much stretch here or squash here. We'd have to, oh, okay, it's affecting the squash there because I chose that curve. So it's affecting how the ball is squashing and stretching. That's what that curve's doing. So that's why the ball feels a little heavier instead of super stretchy. Okay. You can also take that curve and you can multiply it by doing a multiply equals 2. So now we see it stretch a little more throughout the animation. So if you're thinking something's too extreme or needs to be a little bit toned down, that might be a quick way to see if that would help your animation. If you just select the curve and go into that value box and either multiply or divide it, and then it's quick to undo as well. And you wouldn't do this to the time area, because that'll give us decimals, and we don't want to work with decimals for our keys. We want them to again be on whole numbers. We're going to do some of the division within that value box. When we work on our hips, we're going to tone down some of our animation, so you get an actual hands-on piece with that. All right, so let's show this. If I show you a box, we can kind of pretend like this is the hip movement that we're going to be altering when we do that in one of our cycles. Let me see. I want to create a cube. Okay, I'm going to scale that up so it's easier to see. Bring it up here. I'm just going to key it. Whoops. Go over here. Actually, I'm going to pretend like this is one of our loops that we're doing. So this key and the first key and the last key should be the same. All right, and then I'll do this. So this is what we have. Okay. Now we can see that it's going to pretty much the end of the grid and coming back. So if we think of it as our hips are swinging back and forth, that'll be in our translate X. Now if we select all of those keys and go divide equals 2, now if we look at it in the perspective view, you can see that it's staying closer to the origin. It's not going all the way to the end of the grid here because we made that motion not as extreme. Now if we go back in and we say times equals 4. Whoops. I don't think I was in the box. Now you can see how quickly that curve jumped up and became more extreme, and it's even further away from the origin there, this motion is. And within that time, frame, it feels like it's happening a lot quicker as well, because it doesn't have, since it's going further, it would need more time to feel like it's, you know, the animation that we had before. So a smaller movement like this feels like it's happening really slow within the same amount of time. So when you're doing your own appealing walk, this might help in some areas when you're trying to push your poses. If you want to be more extreme, you would multiply within the value box. And now I'm going to show you a little bit of post infinity and what to expect for first and last keys. So if I turn on post infinity for this, which is the second one in here, post infinity cycle, since these are both flat and, you know, the same key, we still get this curve happening. Now, if I shift middle mouse button drag up, you can tell that the first and last keyframe are not the same and this won't loop. And so it'll feel snappy. See how it feels snappy within the animation? Like it's just snapping back over there. That's because they're not matching up and looping properly. So that's a good sign if you if you get this 90-degree angle happening here, that your first and last keyframes are not the same, and you should check those out. So I'll undo that. Now, when you get into your animation, your walk cycles and things, you might have to clean this up. And if you clean it up to go this direction to match the curve, then you'll have to clean this one up. And right now, that doesn't make any sense for the animation we're doing, but you'll see that, there we go. That's better. So if I have this one going down and this one's going down there, you can see that the curve is matching on both sides, right? We have a nice smooth curve here. But if I turn this one flat and I come back over here, you get this hard angle here, which in some cases would work, but for this one we would want it to be smooth for our walk cycles. We want them to continue, feel like a fluid motion. So make sure you're watching those as well, and that curve looks like it's supposed to be doing what it's doing. So this one would be flat too, and then we have that motion that we want. You would clean these up specifically when we do those offsets, because if you have something that's not cleaned up at the front or the first and last keyframe, let's turn it this way. So we have that weird loop that we don't, or weird angle that we don't want, because it's kind of like it's hitting really hard when that happens. So see how it feels like it's kind of hitting a wall? That can happen in your animation as well. So if we shift middle mouse button drag for an offset, let's see how that looks in the middle. So we're getting it right in the middle of our animation. It's about right here. And it feels like it's just hitting a wall. So I'll bring this back to where we want it. And we'll play that again because we just did a lot of different things. And let's see how that one's supposed to look. Now it feels like a fluid motion, and it doesn't feel like it's stopping at any point. It's just continuously moving. All right, let's go back to our graph editor presentation. All right, so these are the takeaways. And for today, you'll need to take a screenshot of this to include within your 2.1 assignment. So these are the takeaways that I felt like you should take from this, and there's not a lot here, but really just diving in and practicing in the graph editor is the big one. Not feeling nervous about that, just getting in there, getting dirty, seeing what's happening within your animation. Get familiar with the tools as you work, and if you need help, Maya Help Docs is always a great place to look, and they have all kinds of great, visuals and information for you there to help you really understand some of those things. And it really will make animating so much easier once you begin to understand what's happening in the graph editor. So getting familiar with the tools as you work, even though you're new to all of this, it's gonna help you a lot. So you can look back to these slides within the live lecture, or jump into the Maya Help Docs where you can search for the answers you need. And I had one other thing there that I just lost. So basically, the graph editor, think of the graph editor as it's just a tool, just like Photoshop's a tool. You have to get comfortable using it before you feel artistic in it, right? That's what the graph editor is for us as animators. So that's all I have today. Next week is instead of a live lecture, it's a Discord open lab, and that'll be at 6 p.m. Eastern as well on Tuesday. And we'll go over, in the Discord open lab assignment, you'll have your lecture within there, and it'll go over the Mary rig and show you how to add arm and hand animation. And then it gives you tips for how to use your reference and a video that you can look at for your appealing walk. So your week 3 Discord open lab, again, will take place at 6 p.m. Eastern. After viewing the live lecture, you can hop into the open lab, and if you have questions, I can answer those for you, or if you just want to hang out, we can do that as well. Anything you want to chat about related to the program, I'll be available for. And while I'm waiting, I'll just be working on a personal animation, and I'll have screen sharing on. So feel free to come hang out, and if you have questions, I'll be there for you. As always, though, you can just message me through Discord anytime. I see those, and I try to answer those as quickly as possible. I have that app on my phone, so it's easier for me to get to than the LMS. If you still haven't set up Discord or don't know how to get to the open lab, please let me know and I can help you with that. So with that, that's all I have for you tonight. If you have any questions, definitely drop them in the chat, or feel free to Discord chat me, and I'll answer those for you as soon as I can. Again, I'll be on for, let's say, we'll call it at 6:55, because then that'll get me ready for my other class and their live lecture. So just drop in the chat if you have any questions now, and I'll be on for a little longer. Or you're free to go too if you don't have any questions. But otherwise, we're done for tonight, and I'll be on for a little longer if you do have any questions. And I'll open up my Discord chat if that's easier for you as well. Sounds great, Stephanie. Thank you. You have a good night too. All right, I haven't heard from anyone else. So I'm going to go ahead and shut down. But if you have, again, I think I've said it 3 times, you know where to find me if you have questions. So I'll talk to you later and have a great night.